This is Camera B and we're reviewing The Danish Girl.
The Danish Girl is set in the 1920s and stars Eddie Redmayne as Einar as he undergoes one of the world's first sex change operations. Before I went to see this film, I had seen the trailer, so I knew what it was about. I knew that it was about a sex change operation and I knew the time and the setting, but that's about all I knew.
Yeah, all I'd seen is the trailer, and the trailer made it look so good. I was really looking forward to this going in.
Yeah, the trailer was really good. And after seeing the movie, the trailer does seem even better now because it doesn't explain the entire plot. It's done very well.
Yeah, unlike some trailers where it spoils the movie really, this one was one that it worked you up to go and see it but didn't give too much away. So from that trailer I had really great expectations for this movie. I was really looking forward to it.
I did think it could be good, and I definitely thought it was definitely worth watching, but I was a bit wary about how they would handle the entire story.
Okay, so that's what we were expecting going in. Now let's work through what we actually thought, starting with cinematography. I thought that was great from the very opening sequence.
Absolutely agree. It was beautiful.
My only complaint with the opening sequence is that I missed the transition from the framing up of the trees and the lake in the background, then to the painting that Einar had done.
It certainly felt the same way directly after the cut, but after seeing the actual painting, you quickly catch on.
Yeah, my only issue was I was left thinking, was this a real scene that was seen, or is this something in his mind? And that was played up on a bit through the movie, so I was a bit disappointed I missed that, but it's probably my fault.
Yeah, it is.
So after the title sequence then, the film really starts, and the cinematography just continued to get better for me. So I noticed one of the things is that when actors were on the screen in the early scenes of the movie, we saw only parts of them in the frame, which kind of told me that we're only seeing part of the story at the moment.
And there's a lot of talking through veils, and a lot of talking through windows, which further accentuates that.
Yeah, there was, particularly at the beginning, which was kind of, as we were getting to know the characters, it was like we were observing them, doing whatever they were doing, and then there was much less of that later on in the film.
You're absolutely right. Good observational skills, Gareth.
One of the other cinematography things I noticed is that a lot of the cuts in it, they seem to cut from, say, motion in the scene to a still camera, and then the camera would start moving, which I really like those gradual cuts. It kind of gently broke the scene down for me.
It did, and it was a nice change of scene. It was easier to tell the significance of a different scene rather than the significance of, say, moving into a different room.
Yeah, and they did the same thing with landscape shots for when they moved to different places. I really like the fact that there were some really good placing shots of the different cities and different buildings.
They were nice shots, and they certainly helped set the scene and set the setting, but they didn't convey any of the emotion or any of the plot.
So that outside scene at the beginning when Einar and Gerda are walking down the street and someone shouts out of the window, I quite like the way that that was shot, but there wasn't that much outside stuff really.
No, and I think that's further is explained because it's really looking inward toward Einar, and so the majority of it would be inside of where he's comfortable.
So if we're talking about cinematography, we have to talk about sound and music, and I really like the soundtrack in this. It was noticeable when it was there, it was particularly noticeable when it was absent, and there were silent parts in the film.
I don't remember much of the soundtrack, but I do remember the parts where you noticed it wasn't there, but for me that wasn't a good thing. Normally in a film, when you notice that there's a silence, you notice that in the context of the film universe itself. Whereas in this film, I really saw more of it as part of the film editing process rather than the film.
That was a bit distracting in a way, but I like the fact that there was a gap in the soundtrack and they let what was going on screen just take over.
They included a lot of sound effects that I wouldn't have noticed if they didn't include it, but the fact that they did include it makes it a little bit more real, such as walking on the wooden floors. That sounded a lot more real than a lot of other films that are in the same kind of setting. So let's talk about the script as well, which I found to be okay.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with that. There weren't any major flaws in the script in the way it was done, but yeah, it wasn't something that you'd say, oh, it's amazing.
I feel like they used the script well, but they could have had less dialogue and more conveyed in the acting.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have some moments where the motions of the actors told you the whole story, and they did lean on the script a lot for that.
Exactly, yeah.
Which kind of takes on to acting, because my big problem with the acting in this movie is that Eddie Redmayne, I wasn't convinced by his emotion in the early scenes of the movie.
Particularly in the early scenes. Although I wonder if that was because he was supposed to be conflicted.
In which case it's very clever.
Exactly. But of course that could also be excused for subpar acting.
In his relationship with Gerda, his wife, I got the relationship coming from Gerda towards Einar, but it didn't go backwards. He would say, oh, I love you, that sort of thing. And maybe that was really clever because it was that whole confliction, but I expected the movie to start with them as a really happy couple and it going both ways, and it didn't.
Whereas Alicia Vikander had a great range of emotions that she could convey because she had to go from being in love to being confused to feeling like she was losing her husband and then to him dying at the end.
And she had little moments in it where she'd go from sort of being happy and just talking to her instant snap, and she'd be really angry and cold for a second, and then would go back, and I really liked that.
Yeah, she was phenomenal in this.
Yeah.
She wasn't phenomenal. She was really good in this.
One scene I did notice is in the acting place with all the costumes hanging from the ceiling. The other people there, they just seem to be going through the motions of talking, particularly those jokes about couples and things.
Yeah, and it felt about as fake as I would expect a party like that to feel anyway.
Okay, so acting was good. I mean, we're going to have a couple of complaints, but it was still really good. How about the plot then?
The plot was pretty decent. I lean more on the side of liking the plot than not liking the plot.
I didn't really get Einar's character at first. So when we first saw the movie, he was clearly a husband to a wife. I got that, but I wasn't sure what his past was. I couldn't pick that up from maybe the acting or from the script or whatever. I just struggled to connect with him at first. When they talked about Hans and they were talking about the fact that there'd been a kite incident, I thought, oh, was that a previous boyfriend? And I thought, oh, maybe I'm just reading too much into that. Maybe there'd been no previous wanting to dress like a woman kind of thing before.
Certainly got the impression that he had never done that before.
But then the wife seemed so comfortable with it when he was wearing the nightdress that I thought, oh, this must have happened before.
I was certainly expecting her to say something.
Yeah.
And when she didn't, I didn't think, has this happened before? I thought she's a pretty cool wife.
I see, you just gave me questions really about it.
One thing that did confuse me was the operation, and that was split into two parts. However, when they had the first part of the operation, I felt like they had done both parts of the operation, despite the fact that they said they needed a rest in between.
Yeah, exactly. I had 10 minutes to sit in there trying to work out what had gone on. Another point that really stood out to me is the incident in France when she got beaten up. And that kind of just stood out to me as so different to the rest of the film.
Yeah, it felt pretty forced there. It felt like they had to include that scene to, in essence, show the societal pressure, which for the most part of the film, they gloss over.
Yeah, they do. And it's just between the wife, it's just between Einar and Gerda. And there in that scene, it suddenly becomes a public thing. I don't know why they did it, but I guess you say they needed to. Okay, so we're missing one big part of the plot, really, which if you haven't seen the movie, then turn it off now, definitely. But Lily dies. I didn't know that was going to happen at all.
During the fever, I definitely felt like that was when she was most likely to die. But after that passed, I still felt like she was going to die at some point soon. They needed a bittersweet ending. It is a tragedy, ultimately. This film is a tragedy.
Well, we've been through everything, and my issue now then is that each of the points we've picked out, cinematography was really good.
Cinematography was good, didn't integrate well with the film.
Okay, but it was still good.
Yeah.
Sound was good.
Sound was good, but the mixing of the silence felt jarring.
Yeah, but that was only a couple of times, one or two situations here and there. Script, we both agreed that was good.
Yeah, nothing too flawed there.
Acting, there was some really good acting in it.
There was, and there was specifically with Alicia Vikanders.
Yeah, and then plot, okay, I had a couple of confusing moments in it, but still I enjoyed the plot.
Yeah, it was a interesting story.
Which brings me to the point of why I didn't enjoy the movie more.
It's usually with a film, you're expecting something greater than the sum of its parts, but this wasn't.
Well, I mean, that's the problem with the movie then, isn't it? I mean, given all of that then, would you pay to see it again?
No.
No, me either.
I would see it again, but only if there wasn't anything else to see.
Yeah, this is one of those that I would like to see it again, but I wouldn't pay.
Exactly, no. So I would rate this film, you won't want to refund after you've seen it, but you might think you should have seen something better. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Camera B. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next week with another movie to review. So remember, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can go to h9blog.com/camerab to find out more. Bye bye.